Let me read to you a passage from the 11th chapter of St. John's Gospel, verses 45 to 56. It's the Gospel for Saturday of the 5th week of Lent. St. John writes, "Many of the Jews who had come to Mary and seen what Jesus had done began to believe in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees convened the Sanhedrin and said, 'What are we going to do? This man is performing many signs. If we leave him alone, all will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our land and our nation.' But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, 'You know nothing, nor do you consider that it is better for you that one man should die instead of the people, so that the whole nation may not perish.' He did not say this on his own, but since he was high priest for that year, he prophesied that Jesus was going to die for the nation, and not only for the nation, but also to gather into one the dispersed children of God. So from that day on they planned to kill him. So Jesus no longer walked about in public among the Jews, but he left for the region near the desert, to a town called Ephraim, and there he remained with his disciples. Now the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went up from the country to Jerusalem before Passover to purify themselves. They looked for Jesus and said to one another, as they were in the temple area, 'What do you think? That he will not come to the feast?'" That's from John chapter 11, verse 45 to 56. We are led to think of Christ's death. A few important things strike us as we ponder on that gospel passage I've just read. Our Lord's great power is evident, and the course of events narrated in the passage was occasioned by his spectacular raising of Lazarus from the dead. At a word, Christ had called his friend Lazarus forth from the tomb, where his body had lain for 4 days. There was nothing he could not do, and so we read that many of the Jews who had come to Mary and seen what Jesus had done began to believe in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees convened the Sanhedrin and said, "What are we going to do? This man is performing many signs. If we leave him alone, all will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our land and our nation." Our Lord's holiness and authority over both the natural elements and the things of God was leaving the nation's religious leaders confused and in a state of panic. They felt their privileged position was falling away from under them, and they clutched at pretexts of a political order to justify their desire to do away with him. The unworthy and devious Caiaphas uttered his prophecy that, "You know nothing, nor do you consider that it is better for you that one man should die instead of the people, so that the whole nation may not perish." Caiaphas was serving as an unwitting instrument of Satan and providing for himself a pretext to assuage his conscience. It is better that one die rather than the entire people. Little did he know how truly he spoke in a higher sense. Jesus would die not only for his own people, but for the whole world. As we think of our Lord allowing the net gradually to close around him, let us think of the genuineness of the incarnation. The great God truly became man and took unto himself the weakness and limitations of the human condition. He assumed a human nature and immersed himself in our condition. He had the power, but ultimately he did not use it to protect himself. The power of God was at work within these limitations, and especially within the most crushing of them, his death. He would allow himself to be crushed in bearing witness to his true nature and mission, and his submitting to death would be his greatest work. The greatest negative in his life became the greatest positive. There is nothing more negative in life than death, and so much good seems to come to nothing precisely by the arrival of death. But Christ reversed this pattern in his death. His death, planned and orchestrated by his enemies, with Satan behind it all, was the means whereby he attained the goal of his life and his mission. There is nothing he did during his life that could compare with what he did by means of his obedient death. The Pharisees who plotted against him, Caiaphas the high priest, and others of the Sanhedrin, thought they were solving their problem of having to endure the person and influence of Jesus. In their evil way, they were instead serving our Lord's mission. The providence of God is all-powerful and all-encompassing. It will not lose out. So let us resolve to follow Christ in his path of trust in the plan of the Father. Whatever may happen, all things will come together for the good of those who love God and for the good of mankind. Life is complex and full of surprises, both good and bad. The important thing is the final upshot. The final outcome is determined, as with our Lord himself, most especially by our death and the way we die. This in turn will depend on how we have lived. Let us resolve to live in union with Christ so as to be able to die with him. If we die with him, we shall rise with him and reign with him.